Hello and welcome. My name is Deborah Schlossberg, and I'm the director of the Pro Bono program at Berkeley Law. First, I want to thank Utah Law for hosting this Pac-12 Access to Justice series. You are here to listen to our wonderful panelists speaking to the response to the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. In the wake of the grave humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, the attorney panelists here today recognized a need to immediately provide pro bono legal support to individuals at risk of persecution in Afghanistan. Professor David Oppenheimer will engage in conversation with the panelists to understand the pro bono effort undertaken to engage hundreds of attorneys and law students to provide immediate legal support to thousands of Afghan clients. I'm going to give very brief introductions to the people that you're going to hear from today. They all could be spoken about for many, many minutes, if not hours, but I'm going to keep it short so you can hear from them. Professor David Oppenheimer is a clinical professor of law at Berkeley Law. He teaches civil procedure, evidence, and comparative equality law. He directs the Berkeley Center on Comparative Equality and Anti-Discrimination Law, and most importantly, he is a faculty co-director of our pro bono program. Leila Ayub is an Afghan organizer and an immigration attorney whose work includes coordinating advocacy efforts, assisting in litigation, and leading release campaigns for asylum seekers detained in immigration prisons with the ultimate goal of abolishing immigrant detention. She is a co-coordinator of Project Anar, which you will be hearing about today. And she assists Afghans with humanitarian parole applications to gain entry into the United States. Ugay Momand is an attorney at Morgan Lewis and UC Berkeley Law alumna. She started Project Anar with her co-founder Leila to address the urgent legal needs of Afghans and file humanitarian parole applications for those in need. Zulekha Aziz is a Berkeley Law grad and human rights lawyer with more than a decade of experience working on rule of law, access to justice, legal empowerment, and women's legal rights issues internationally, and almost 2 decades of experience working in Afghanistan. She has worked with international organizations, multilateral institutions, government agencies, and local civil society groups, including Women for Afghan Women and the Afghanistan Human Rights and Democracy Organization. And she is a co-director of the Berkeley Law Afghanistan project that you will be hearing about today. And finally, last but not least, Roya Masumi is a co-director for the Berkeley Law Afghanistan project. Roya is an expert in civil rights, anti-discrimination litigation, and has over 15 years of experience litigating in federal district courts and administrative tribunals, including the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She serves as a lead assistant counsel for one of the nation's largest federal agencies, advising on Title VII compliance and internal investigations. Roya is also an alumna of Berkeley Law, class of '04, and a former member of the International Human Rights Clinic, a wonderful clinic at our law school. That is the last that you will hear of me until the end of the program. And I'd like to hand the mic over to Professor Oppenheimer. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Deborah, very much. And thank you to our 4 speakers and to all of you who have joined us this evening. I have to say, Deborah did very little of introducing herself, but she has done an amazing job of building a pro bono program at Berkeley Law in which virtually every first-year student participates, in which over 100 second-year students act as leaders, and in which over 3 dozen programs are initiated and directed by students. So we are really thrilled to have her as our director of pro bono. And we are thrilled, and I must say just personally very moved by the work that these 4 remarkable lawyers are doing in response to the crisis in Afghanistan. And I can't thank you enough for taking time from your really busy lives right now to join us this evening. So let me begin by asking you how you responded to the crisis in Afghanistan, both on a personal level and institutionally. And Layla, may I start with you?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for having us and inviting us to speak about this. So I am an immigration lawyer, used to working in emergency response settings, and those are the skills that I had, right? And I'm also an Afghan organizer, and those are the things that guided my personal response to what was happening in August. That led me to connect with Ogay and others to talk about what we could do to quickly put together some information to be able to share with our friends and family and community about immigration pathways that exist for Afghans. That was the immediate response. And because of the overwhelming need, it developed into this pro bono project that we are now working on together. Our community was scrambling to work on applications for friends and family. People who are non-attorneys were doing these applications themselves. And it's led us to partnering with others, including Pangea Legal Services and Centro Legal de la Raza, and folks from all over the country to equip volunteer lawyers to be able to support Afghans in need of assistance on humanitarian parole applications. I will let others talk because I know that we might have some overlapping things to share on this point.
Hi,
Let's pass the baton to Ogi. Very good.
Hi, everyone. This is my name is Ogay. I work with Layla on this humanitarian parole project, which we've called Project Anad. And just to provide everyone's a little bit of context, humanitarian parole, when it comes to Afghanistan and when it comes to immigration pathways for Afghans, a lot of the efforts are primarily focused on SIV or P2, which means that folks in Afghanistan have to be US affiliated or US allied in some way. And for the vast majority of people, that's just not true. It wasn't true for our families. So that's why we landed on humanitarian parole. And the humanitarian parole process is a process that is not very common. It's used in emergency situations and it's built for moments like this. So I think that's important to keep in mind and really demonstrates that the specific group of people we are trying to help is not really a group in Afghanistan that gets a lot of attention.
Zuleika?
Yeah, so initially when the government in Afghanistan collapsed and the Taliban took over power, it was very devastating for me. And like Ogay and Layla and Roya, for our family and friends in Afghanistan, for me, I have colleagues over the last almost 2 decades that have worked on democracy and governance projects, that have worked on women's legal rights projects, that have worked on human rights activities, whose lives were in danger. And so, to be very frank, for the first few days, I was scrambling. To try to organize evacuation flights, to try and get people on lists upon lists that the State Department, that different US government organizations were putting together. The White House was working on it. There were so many lists, reaching out to my representatives, just trying to advocate through any channel I could to get folks that were contacting me and pleading for help, a pathway to safety. And it was very difficult because that whole evacuation process was very chaotic and very unorganized. So from my perspective, many of my colleagues worked on US government projects, US government funded projects, I should say, either as contractors or subcontractors. They were eligible for SIV, they were eligible for P2, and yet they were still not able to get on the planes. So for the first few, I would say for the first 2 weeks, that was the main focus up until August 28th, I think was when the last flight left. And we saw that evacuations weren't happening anymore. And then we had to quickly think of what are other pathways. And Ogay and Layla had already done such a great job of putting together wonderful resources, which were a guide to folks on different pathways out of Afghanistan. So we reached out to them and spoke with them. And at that time, we had also been speaking to Berkeley that was really interested in supporting Roya and I in bringing students on board and assisting in pro bono advocacy. And so we started working with students, training them up on humanitarian parole and also how to triage just emergency questions that were coming into us from all over the place, both from Afghanistan and from family and friends of people who were stuck in Afghanistan. And so, yeah, I'll let Roya go a little bit more into how our project is developed and how we're implementing it now, but that was our immediate response.
Thank you. And Roya, do you want to add to that and talk about your own experience?
Sure, thank you, Professor Oppenheimer. What I want to, I guess, communicate is that, being an Afghan American and an attorney, is a lot. It's heavy at this time because you're trying to wear an advocate hat, but at the same time, you're a human being. I personally came to the United States as a refugee as a child, and a lot of the images and everything that I saw unfold over the past month and a half has been really just a reminder of everything that happened the first time when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. So for me, when you ask, what did you do immediately? I think there was for me just a sense of shock. Even though I was familiar with the CGAR reports, I knew that this had been predicted by the Inspector General's office. And I had heard that the generals had advised President Biden to not withdraw. It's different to actually see it unfolding in front of your eyes on TV. So I, like the rest of the United States, was looking, or the world, in dismay and shock. And, for me, it was even just horror, looking at these people, thinking about their lives. I personally have family in Afghanistan right now. So for me, it was just a constant challenge of thinking, how can I be effective as an advocate with the skill set that I have? And how do I balance the humanity of the situation, the fact that I'm feeling just at a complete loss for the carnage that I'm seeing happen, to Afghans and American soldiers, to anybody who's involved. And just balancing that slowly, as like I said, we started to get a stream. Anybody who knew you were an attorney, would contact you and ask you to save their life, or ask you to have mercy on their life. And that is a tremendous burden to bear. And you want to be able to carry that and meet that, even though you have your own trauma from your own experience being a refugee. So the first thing that I did was contact the UC Berkeley Law School, because I had relationships with Professor Fletcher there, and I had relationships with Professor Jess Sturm, who's at Hastings now, but she was my professor when I was at UC Berkeley, because, as an advocate, I knew I was getting tons of evidence in my phone. And I had, voicemails, I had photographs and videos, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I wanted to be a responsible steward of it, while at the same time trying to manage the fact that my own family was in hiding in Afghanistan. So that was my first inclination, is to figure out, when I log into the computer or I get into my phone, it's literally a war zone for me. How can I be effective in this chaotic space and plug into a place that makes a difference? And my first inclination was to go to Berkeley Law School, to work with the pro bono group there, which I'm so thankful for, and to meet lovely Zuleika, who has been just an amazing partner in this process.
So I'm feeling the I'm feeling the pain, and that this is very personal. And what was the response of Berkeley students when you reached out to the law school in terms of wanting to be part of what you were going to try to do? And so, Roya, can I stick with you on
Sure.
that?
The response actually brings a little bit of tears to my eyes because these students, we have about 100 students that, without question, immediately signed up without even knowing the full scope of the project. It's something that we were developing organically in a very, very volatile situation where our needs were changing by the minute. And 100 students signed up, wanting to be a part of a response, pro bono. And this is students from 1Ls to 3Ls. And I remember when I was a 1L, I didn't have time for anything. So I can't imagine that these students made time to really commit to these families. And really, it's difficult work. They are getting exposed to secondary trauma, a lot of them with the evidence that they're looking at, and they're actually meeting the family members of the people that are in Afghanistan. They're getting this experience to really advocate compassionately in a very, very difficult situation where we don't have clear answers. Everyone knows humanitarian parole is not an easy out. It's what I call it's a pathway in case a gate opens. So for us to see the overwhelming response of the university has just been incredibly touching, and I'm just so moved by the fact that they've been this committed, and they continue to be through midterms and their own exams and all of the other things that accompany being a law student.
So working with the students, what is the work that you're doing? Can you describe to the people who are here this evening, who are interested in hearing about this, what it is that under your supervision these students are doing to help with the crisis? And Roya, we could stay with you. We could move back to Zuleika at this point, or up to Agi or Layla. You tell me.
I can chime in, and then I think it would be good for Ogai and Lila to talk about the process, because some of our students are working with them and vetting some of the sponsors because there are different requirements for humanitarian parole, but all of our students are not working with them. So working with individual volunteer to work with them on petitions. But for Roya and I, since we are supervising law students, what project that we've come up with pairs 2 law students on one petition, on one humanitarian parole petition that has a petitioner in the US. So the students can contact the petitioner in the US and solicit all of the information that's needed to both guide them in filling out the forms that are required by USCIS and in preparing the cover letters, declarations, all of the evidence that is then needed to support the petition in the filing. So that's the process that we have developed, and it's a process that was slow going in the beginning because there's a lot of training that has to happen. Our students, many of them are 1Ls and haven't drafted a declaration before. They haven't filled out these immigration forms before. So the first couple of weeks were just a number of different trainings, putting together the packets, the applications, and guiding them through what one would look like. And then after they saw that one process, they've just run with it. Honestly, the students some of them are in their 2nd and 3rd cases now. They have taken on more on their extra time that they have, and they've really done a great job in going above and beyond what we were initially expecting them to do with a single petition. So it's been a really great experience working with them.
We're thrilled to hear that. How many clients are you representing at this point?
So right now we have about 100 cases that we are working on at the moment with our students, but I'll let Ogay and Layla talk a little bit more about the volume because they're dealing with a massive volume of cases right now. And I think they can shed some more light on all of the different types of cases they're working on.
Great. So let's turn it back to the two of you to talk about just how big a crisis is this in terms of the people in need.
Mhm. Yeah, so I can really quickly provide some numbers and logistics of how this works. So we have about 9,000 Afghan individuals that we are assisting or that have signed up for assistance. We have nearly 1,000 legal volunteers, and that includes attorneys, law students, paralegal, anyone who's not an attorney is paired up with an attorney, and then we assign out these cases. And it's 9,000 individuals, but a lot of these folks are in family batches. So it can be a family of, anywhere from 2 people to 50 people. So we have been pairing people up and getting cases assigned out really across the country. A lot of people have filled out our form and seeking assistance. And those are both people who are in Afghanistan and also people who are in the United States who are hoping to serve as sponsors for their families in Afghanistan. So along with pairing up legal volunteers and Afghan applicants, we're also providing sponsors or finding sponsors for people in Afghanistan who don't have a US-based connection. And I think that's also really important because it emphasizes humanitarian parole, like I mentioned before, is used for people who are, in the case of Afghanistan, for people who are not US allied or US affiliated. And so we're targeting those people, but we're also targeting the people who don't have any US connections at all. A lot of people in Afghanistan have relatives that are here that we can help match up, but I think we're hitting a completely different group of people with folks reaching out directly to us. So it's a really, really large scale project. It's been really wonderful to see the legal community come together, but we've had to come together. We've been forced to come together because the government, USCIS, has left so many gaps in this process. And I mean, to demonstrate that point, our Project Anar's guide and training video on how to file humanitarian parole applications was up before USCIS had anything up on their website. And and that literally means Afghan organizers and lawyers and their allies and people we know coordinating quicker than the US government. So it is, it is wonderful to see people come together, but we shouldn't have to come together so quickly and work so hard. We should have institutional support, which is still lacking even at this point. So.
And 1,000 volunteer lawyers. Did I get that number right?
And we definitely still need more. And the last thing that I would just add to what Ogay was saying is that us coming together with Zulekha and Roya was an example of how this was an effort led by the Afghan community in the US, right? We the resources that we put out and the posts that we put out on social media, we meaning all 4 of us, that is how people were getting information. And I remember, I think we connected with Zulekha over Instagram, and then we got on a call together the next day, and then we connected with Roya, and that is how this has been happening for the last month. We see the need directly because of all the people who are contacting us over social media, and because this is our community, and we also have been able to come together and continue coordinating throughout the last month.
What kind of roadblocks are you running into? I mean, it was suggested in your last answer that the US government is one of those roadblocks.
I can start on that.
Sure.
yeah, one example of this is like, yes, the lack of transparency from the government on this process, right? Humanitarian parole is something that we're hearing a lot right now because it is an application that can be approved and then someone has permission to come to the US. It is reserved for urgent situations. And of course, we would consider this an urgent situation, and that's why folks are doing this. But even the government seems unclear about how the process works. This form that you have to fill out as part of the application is something that can be used for a number of different purposes. And we see the forms get rejected, even though they're filled out correctly, because the government isn't used to reading them filled out the way that we're using them, just things like that. Even today, there was a website on a page on the USCIS website for Afghan humanitarian parole that went live again, and that had been archived for like 3 weeks. So we didn't know what the current information was. There was just a warning on this page that said this information is out of date. And we didn't know what information we could be relying on if the information there was on the government website said that it was out of date. So that's just one kind of general example of how difficult it has been to navigate this one legal process.
And I'll really quickly add to that as well. There is a $575 filing fee for each application. So that means if you have a family of 10, for example, you're paying literally thousands of dollars. And we've been speaking to a lot of people in the Afghan community here in the US. People have had meetings with USCIS, with DHS, with Secretary Mayorkas asking for that fee to be waived, and the government refuses to do it. So instead of, and like we're fundraising, we're trying to pay for these fees for our community, but really that money could be used for something so much better, right? Than just funneling it back to USCIS. There's also a component of the humanitarian parole application that requires that you go to a US embassy for an interview. And we've asked for clearer guidance on that, and also, or for that requirement to be waived entirely, because there is no US embassy in Afghanistan anymore. And there have been roadblocks there. We're not getting straight answers. We're getting the runaround. And the suggestion right now is for people to go to a third country, which is very dangerous. And we're not actively telling anyone to do that because of how dangerous it can be.
So is there anyone, either in the State Department or in the White House, for whom this is their responsibility right now, to work with Afghan community, to work with pro bono lawyers, to solve problems, to open roadblocks, to make the system work?
I mean, I think there have been lots of meetings, and I think that, we've tried to advocate on a number of different fronts. We've written letters, we've spoken directly to people, we have made these demands, and most of the demands that Layla and Ogay mentioned are, the fee waiver, making it clear what U.S. Embassy guidance is with regards to the travel documentation once approval is obtained. And another issue just to mention is for our cases, we filed our first case about 5 weeks ago, and we still haven't gotten an approval or a rejection on that case. We've been getting confirmations of receipt, but we haven't gotten any approvals, and these cases are supposed to be expedited. So we were under the impression that within 2 to 4 weeks, we would be getting responses. We're not getting responses. And this is causing a lot of stress within our beneficiary communities because they were looking at this as one hope for them, making decisions to leave the country, to try and obtain visas to third countries, to travel by land borders, taking huge risks on their lives and their families' lives. And they're still waiting in limbo. So I think that's one of our other main hurdles at this point, is not even knowing what results this process will lead in. We've heard some anecdotal evidence of approvals being received, but practically we haven't experienced it with our clients. And so just to have a clearer pathway is something that I think is required for all of these petitions.
So by comparison, I know that there are lawyers all over Europe who are working on this issue and working on particularly getting activists and journalists and women's rights workers out of Afghanistan and into Europe. Are they having the same, are you in touch with them? Are they having the same kind of experience?
I personally have been in touch with some folks in Europe and also in Latin America, and I think they're following more diplomatic channels. They've had some luck with chartered flights, and their visa issuance process is different than what we're seeing here in the States. There have been some chartered flights that have left Afghanistan even in the last couple of weeks. However, those flights, it's very opaque how people are getting on those flights. A lot of it is advocacy being done by different congressional representatives or political folks that you have to have the right contacts with. And so I think we're all trying as many contacts as we can, but when you're dealing with such a wide scope of people who are in danger, whose lives are at threat, who are facing direct persecution, sometimes those people don't have the direct channels. And so that's why we are requesting for clearer guidelines and clearer pathways so that folks know what they can expect, so that at least some certainty can be provided.
I would just quickly add there, just to echo exactly what Zuleika said, that it really seems like a lot of this is based on who someone knows or what information they're able to access. And oftentimes, even if they get evacuated to another country, they don't have certainty there. Like there might not be refugee processing in that country. And they might still be looking for a pathway to reunite with family in the US.
So a question has been put into the chat. Can first-year law students from other law schools volunteer? And I'd love for one or both of, or all of you to answer that question, but in answering it, to also address how can this be scaled up so that the needs can be met? What are the next steps that have to be taken? It's not all going to come from one or two organizations. It's not all going to come from law students at one law school. So how do we scale up what you're doing?
I'd love to chime in right now to answer the question about scaling up. What we want to clarify is that humanitarian parole, like Wogai and Layla were saying, there isn't much transparency at all from USCIS about how it's going to be implemented. It could be lifted at any time. We don't know what they're going to do with it. So even if we scale it up, we don't have an assurance that something will come of it. So what I want to remind us is our own history. When we left Vietnam, and under the circumstances that we left Vietnam, President Ford said that we owed a tremendous debt to the Vietnamese. And there was a bipartisan effort to pass legislation called the Orderly Departures Act. And under that act, the US government organized and endorsed the departure, just facilitated the departure of 500,000 Vietnamese who are at risk, artists, scholars, human rights activists, people who worked in government, recognizing that they had been advocates and worked so closely with the US and allowed the facilitation of their departure. We don't have that here. It is not politically popular right now to advocate for refugees. Then what you're seeing is a complete erosion of international refugee law. If we had the same kind of esteem for refugee law that we had in the 70s, we wouldn't be in the situation. So when I think of roadblocks, that's the biggest one, is that we need an endorsement politically that not only are we going to accept refugees, but we're going to pass a bill like the Orderly Departures Act that's going to do everything in our power to facilitate the safe departure of Afghans at risk from Afghanistan into the US. And what I just want to highlight really quick is that, these Afghans, it goes without saying, we're living lives in Afghanistan. It's not like, they just wanted to come to the United States and were waiting for this moment. These were people who are now at risk because of the work they did with the United States. So I would think it would behoove our government at the least to in this very polarizing time to come together and act in a bipartisan way to support these refugees in Afghanistan. That's the roadblock I wanted to share.
Good, thank you. And are there members of Congress who are working on legislation, and even members from both parties working on bipartisan legislation?
Not that I know of.
Okay, so other...
And just to chime in terms of the 1L who's interested in volunteering, I am sure the ANAR project would love to have the 1L volunteer with them. Unfortunately, we can only work with Berkeley Law students through our pro bono project. But what we have done for folks, reaching out to us, wanting to assist in projects, is refer them to ANAR, and then also provide some resources on how they can assist in petitions if they know someone who wants to petition, and they can work on that on their own. But I think ANAR is probably the best place for them to volunteer.
And that information is up in the chat for anyone to download the link. Let me say to those of you who are in the audience that you can put questions into the Q&A, and we will see them and respond to them. And while we wait for any questions that may be coming, what more would you like the people in our audience to know, to understand about what's happening, about how you're responding to it, about the roadblocks you're facing, about what you see coming?
I'll chime in.
Go ahead.
I think for me, and what I will say is that, we have a shared history with Afghanistan, and I think it's important for us to all remember that it's not just Afghan history, it's Afghan/American history. We were there for 40 years, and I know that because I was 2 when I left Afghanistan, which tells you about how old I am right now, but we've been there for a long time. We have a shared history. And I think what needs to happen is our framework needs to change when we're analyzing Afghanistan to recognize that we are also, stakeholders. And it's not something that's happening on the other side of the world that we were kind of involved in, but not really. We're actually stakeholders. We had a very, very, very involved role in Afghanistan. And when we analyze it that way, then we have more of a vested interest to participate and to contact our legislators and to be more aware of what's happening there. And I think that that's just something really important that I would want people in the audience to know, is that it's really something that affects all of us. We're interconnected in that way. And Afghanistan and the US have had relations for so long. It behooves us as people, as citizens in the US, to understand our shared history.
And I really quickly just wanted to emphasize that this is a very, very long-term project. So a lot of folks are really interested in helping right now, but these issues will continue. And even just the humanitarian parole applications, right? Like, it might be a very, very long time before we see results coming from that. And then there are future concerns, right? So even if a humanitarian parole application is approved, how does someone, and this goes along with the support that Roya mentioned as well, that we need, right? How are those people supposed to get to the airport? How are they supposed to pay for flights? Where do they go once they come here? When it comes about parolees, people who come to the United States on humanitarian parole, travel documents, is that they don't have any type of status. Humanitarian parole is basically a travel document that grants you entry into the United States. So people don't qualify for public benefits at all. They won't get food stamps. They won't get housing assistance. They won't get medical help, nothing. I think right now people at the bases who have come from Afghanistan, they get a COVID vaccine. And that's basically it. So they don't get any type of public benefit. So there needs to be ongoing pushes and advocacy for that. And that is certainly a long-term project. There's also just resettlement efforts in general and creating pathways for status for all of these Afghans who are coming on parolee status. The process is in place in terms of family reunification or asylum. They take years, and we're not sure if people have years to stay here and complete those processes.
Yeah, well, guys is so right. All of that needs to be addressed, and it is a long-term thing. Process. The process that it took to evacuate 500,000 Vietnamese took a decade. So this is a long haul project for sure, and there are a lot of unanswered questions in terms of what will happen to these refugees when they enter the country. We also at the Berkeley Law Afghanistan project, I wanted to add that we are looking at this long term and have some advocacy efforts that we're planning to long term. And one of them is to start documenting all of the human rights violations that are happening in Afghanistan, and to record and preserve the evidence of human rights violations that we're getting. So Lekha, did you want to speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so just to chime in, one of the areas that we've been focusing on and have had most of our efforts focused on in the beginning has been humanitarian parole and pathways to safety, advocating for refugee rights. That's immediate and that's necessary. But long term, we're also looking at Afghans who are staying, who aren't leaving. So those folks are experiencing human rights violations right now. And we know because we're hearing about it constantly. So one of the projects we're working on is to document and preserve incidents of violations and abuses of human rights that folks are facing every day. And this can be used in lots of different ways in the future, in different types of advocacy, and potentially even in international litigation maybe in the future. So this is one area that we think is really important right now, because a lot is happening on the ground, which is not being captured. So many folks have left. Journalists are being repressed. And so the information that's coming out to us is coming through secure channels, but people are frightened because they don't want to expose themselves to even further danger and risk, but they are resisting. They're not backing down. And, we're in contact with women every week who are risking their lives and trying to work towards, their fundamental rights that they believe in. So another aspect of our project will be focused on supporting those women's legal rights activists and human rights defenders in country, working to not only amplify their voices and get their messages out, but use the methods that they need for us to support their work. So yeah, this is, as Ogay mentioned, a very long haul activity, and advocacy for Afghanistan needs to continue in the years ahead.
So as you document the human rights abuses that are occurring, I want to turn to the question asked by my colleague Sue Schechter in the chat, where she asks, what are the reliable resources? What are the reliable places to find accurate news, to find accurate information about what's going on in Afghanistan?
You hit the nail on the head, Professor Oppenheimer. Where is the press, right? Most of the press has been evacuated from Afghanistan. There's a couple of journalists that I'm following, just a handful that are in Afghanistan. And one of them reported being evacuated forcibly, and then snuck back into Afghanistan because she wanted to do the coverage. But there's also journalists in the ground in Afghanistan. They're Afghan nationals, obviously, but their job is incredibly dangerous because of what they're doing.
Anyone want to add to that?
I will just say that the news coming out of Afghanistan, so we're getting a lot of this information from our sources that are in country, but there are news outlets still reporting, and most of that is either in Dari or in Pashto language, but I have been so proud of the majority of the coverage because reporters' lives are under threat and they're still trying to report as openly as they can. So the years of work towards a free and fair press has really, we see the results of that now because the reporting that people are able to get out is not as repressed as I thought it would be under the Taliban.
Yeah,
So-
I'm personally following local news sites that have a translate button that you can translate into English what the reporting is, and that's what I trust personally.
Good, thank you.
And I did just want to quickly add to, right, I think this emphasizes the need to listen to Afghans and listen to the Afghan community in this work. We hear from people we know who are in Afghanistan. That's why we knew to quickly work on humanitarian parole applications. That's why we know what's happening. It's truly, we share information in our community with one another. So I think it just emphasizes the point of how critical it is in this space and in this work and in the coming years to focus Afghans who are doing this work and trust us in this process.
Well, thank you. Another question from the chat, actually two, and I'm going to take Deborah's first, about what other law schools might be able to do. This program is part of a Pac-12 series on law school pro bono. How do we get other law schools involved?
Well, I can start with what the need is for projects like ours. We obviously have a large need for legal assistance. I know that when I was in school, we, for example, could do a spring break project or something like that, where it was literally just a week of your time all at once. And things like that are useful. There's also opportunities to do kind of more ongoing support. There's a need for administrative assistance with screening sponsors, folks who sign up to volunteer to sponsor. If you are able to get together a group of students and find your own supervisor at your school or something, that is amazing. But even if you're only able to volunteer some of your own time for a couple weeks, that is great too. And you can sign up to volunteer and help someone on an application. You will be paired with lawyers. There's also other discrete needs, and I will let others chime in on this too.
The only thing, sorry, David, I was just going to add, and I was going to, I haven't checked with Roya about this, but we're willing to give some advice or guidance to anybody who wants to start a similar project, a similar clinic at their law school. We can share our templates, we can share our samples with you, we can tell you how we did it, and you don't have to have 100 students working on it. You can have 10 or 20. Roy and I think, bit off a lot, and so managing that many students is challenging in its own right. And then there's the legal pedagogy, training them up on all of the different methods that they'll need. But, you can do it on a smaller scale. And I think that would make a big difference as well. So we'd be willing to help you with that if you'd like.
Thank you. That's generous. I'm going to turn it back to Deborah, who I think is going to bring us one or two more questions from the audience. Is that right, Deborah?
Sure, I am happy to. Our next question for the panel is, what is the most salient issue behind the crisis in Afghanistan? Is it the fault of the US for pulling troops out of the country? Or is the blame more on the Taliban organization, who is, I'm reading their language, who is now terrorizing Afghan citizens? How can we rectify these events with our understanding of US foreign policy and our relations with the Middle East / refugees from those countries? So there's a lot in that question to unpack. And I'm guessing people have different perspectives and it's nuanced, but if anybody is willing to begin to answer that question, I will turn it over to the wonderful panelists that we have here.
I just want to share a little bit of my perspective since I've been working in Afghanistan for the past few years, and I was actually there for the year before the pandemic started. And one of the main things I was looking into was the relationship between conflict and corruption. And I think this was an issue in Afghanistan that a lot of people knew about. The corruption in the administration and in the military and different areas of the country, but the corruption which was enabled and I argue started by the US intervention and the development industry that was created by the US. So there's a lot to unpack in that question that was just asked, and I don't think you can put the blame on any one actor, but I think what Afghanistan was used for, if you really look at that, who benefited from the US being in Afghanistan for such a long time and who didn't benefit. The people of Afghanistan didn't benefit. If you look at, all of the civilian casualties that happened over the last 20 years, of course, there were advancements made. And, I think those are the things that we're really grieving now. The fact that women can't continue going to school the way that they were, that women can't continue going to work the way that they were. But from my perspective, this whole sort of house of cards was created by the people who were funding what was happening in the country, and that's the US and the Western allies. So, we can put the blame on the Taliban, which I do. There's so much blame to go on the Taliban, but also who negotiated with them and who brought them back and who has made them now the government of the country. I think that's a legitimate question to ask. And that's my personal perspective, not anybody else's on the panel.
Thank you. Kind of to the last part of that question about how does this relate to our reaction to refugees from Afghanistan, right? My immigration framework response to that is that we need to welcome refugees and migrants no matter what, right? Regardless of how we can break down what happened, there's a tendency to try to address root causes of migration, try to deter migration, but ultimately, even if there are political changes, right, people will become refugees because of climate issues. And the US military occupation is something that produces climate issues, right? Afghans are going to need to migrate no matter what. And our response to that now is to address the policies that make that process harder for them. So that is also my personal perspective as someone who does this work, but that's part of what we have to do now.
I think as we come to the close of the program, I want to give everybody a chance to say anything that hasn't been said, but I might just pose one question that I always have from students, given that hopefully many of the people that are attending are law students interested in this work, and maybe not just interested in it at this moment, but interested in potentially building a career in international human rights or immigration law, or building a pro bono practice in one of those fields. Would you maybe speak to what those students could be doing in law school to develop those skills, to become a strong attorney in those fields? And maybe that's something different from each of you, given that you all do very different work. in your full-time career, but have come to do this work as a pro bono effort in response to the current crisis?
So I want to offer a little bit of perspective. So I work at a big law firm, and I think despite how constricted that is and how outside of the immigration and human rights world that is, there is still opportunity and chances to do this type of work. I was also a Berkeley Law grad. So if you're a Berkeley Law grad, really it's do the work through a slip, do the work through a clinic. And because the direct services experience that you get while you're in law school is so critical in moving forward in learning how to ask people what their needs are and what they want from you, instead of you telling them as an advocate what you think should happen. But I do want to mention, I think regardless of where in the legal field you end up, you can always do this type of work. You just have to prioritize it and push people. Really, you have to push for people to make time for you to do this type of work.
And I would just echo what Ogai just said and encourage students to get as much practice as they can while they're in law school. Both Roya and I were heavily involved with the International Human Rights Law Clinic at Berkeley. I think we both also did the asylum clinic at different times, and that was really foundational for me. I had come to law school knowing that I wanted to practice international human rights law, but after law school, I did go to a firm for a number of years to pay back loans and to do all of that stuff. And so sometimes, you do go a different route. And I was able to work on pro bono initiatives while I was at, my big firm. And that also helped me transition back into the type of work I went to law school for after I had paid my dues. So, I think that the experience you get in law school is really fundamental for the way that you want to take your career. And as Ogai mentioned, there's so many different directions you can go regardless of where you end up right after law school. And so just to keep that perspective and try to gain as many skills, particularly practical skills, as you can while you're in law school.
Yeah, I would just add to that and say, this is a time to try on as many hats as you can as an advocate. There are some of us who go to law school knowing exactly what we want to do, but others, are drawn just, by a sense of wanting to pursue justice. I was in the latter category. I knew I was interested in human rights. I also knew I was very interested in domestic policy for immigrants and refugees and indigent populations. And I needed to explore all of that. And the way I did that was by volunteering at a lot of different organizations. And I continued to volunteer. I did an asylum case when I was at a big firm. And then when I went to federal practice, I'm actually part of a federal pro bono organization as well. And it has carried me through and let me do different types of work. Because as an advocate, you just get better when you try different areas and meet different people, and the big, huge world that we all work in gets a little bit smaller because you start seeing how different industries and areas connect, and you start getting to know people in the community, and that's how you develop your own advocacy style and just your own interests. They're going to change as your career progresses. And doing pro bono work in law school is just the entryway, or even, as an undergrad volunteering, this is where you get to try it on first and keep trying different hats until you find something that you find rewarding.
That's really, really great advice. Thank you for passing that on to the current students. Layla, did you want to add something?
I don't have much to add on that. I am a legal services immigration lawyer. That's all that I've done. You will be coordinating with folks who are at firms and who are in advocacy spaces or in the government when you're doing this work as well. So however you want to tap into this, like there are so many ways to do it. And doing those experiences during law school helps you figure out what capacity you want to be doing this in.
Really, really helpful. Deborah, you want to close us out?
I sure will. I just want to say thank you thank you, of course, for this evening and your time tonight, but thank you for your work. I know many of you have had many sleepless nights, not only because you've been working through them, but because of the personal toll that what is going on in the world is taking on you. And we see you for all of the investments that you're making. And we're so grateful at Berkeley Law for you involving our students and giving them the privilege of engaging in this work to learn and to try to make an impact. And we will continue to support you all. And then to those that have attended today, we thank you for joining us. Spread this word. We shared some links with you for where you can either contribute monetarily to those that are filing humanitarian parole applications, or how you can volunteer to be a sponsor, or how you can volunteer to engage in this legal work. So thank you so much. Thank you to Utah Law for putting on the Pac-12 Access to Justice series. And thank you to my colleague, Professor Oppenheimer, as well. We're so happy you joined us tonight. So goodbye, everyone, and thank you so much.